I'm a co-chair. Did I get upgraded?
Absolutely, vice chair, any title you want, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my wife has some nicknames for me too, and they're not always good. Thank you guys once again for being here. I do appreciate your time. This is something somewhat new to me until we started actually recognizing this hearing. I hadn't really heard this problem with the coho, even though I'm Cherokee and I meet with the tribes on a very regular basis. Obviously, it's a concern to them. Typically, what we hear about is the habitat that they're having a hard time spawning, going back upstream because of dams and infrastructure that's put in place. And that I totally understand. So this is kind of new to me. So I got some questions for you, Ms. Laster. Is that right? When they're doing the test for the 699, I'm looking up my notes here. What is it?
PPDQ.
PPDQ. Thank you. When they're doing the test on that, what was the concentration rate of it? I mean, was this tested in open streams? Was it tested in concentrated pools? And then what was the mixture rate that we were looking at?
So we've tested at concentrations that are found in the environment. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I don't know how meaningful they would be. But
was it tested in the environment or in moving body of water, or was it a concentrated pool?
Mostly we've been testing in labs. I mean, there's been a lot of different testing happening, not just at my agency, so I can't speak to that. But we have tested in the lab at concentrations that have been found in the environment.
But not in the environment. So we haven't actually tested this in the moving water environment to see how fast it's actually diluted inside the moving water, and then what's the concentration rate per acreage of water per fish.
Okay, we have sampled for 6-PBDQ in our moving waterways, but when we're doing the tests on fish, that's happening in a laboratory environment.
And listen, I'm all about finding an alternative. I really am. But we also need to understand the impact of it too.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I think what Ms. Norburn was referring to by a third less. Remember, this is affected by oxygen when it interacts with it. So you can't just look at the tire based on the miles, because it's the exposure rate, it's the dry rot. It's the same thing if a car is sitting there in the environment for 4 years, 5 years, even though it's not driven, it can be a brand new tire. They'll create dry rot, which makes it not safe to drive anymore. It's the amount of time it can be exposed, and I think that's what we need to be looking at here. Because the people that are today just used to look at the tread rate on it, then you're not going to understand the dry rot, the cracking that's happening on the sidewalls, which is where the dangerous part happens. It blows out on the front axle. You have all types of issues, and then it's the effect that happens not just to the driver, but then everyone around the vehicle. And I do feel I feel very strongly we need to find the alternatives, but we also need to find the true impact of this. As the industry is looking for an alternative, we need to actually understand the science and the impacts of it too, and the cost to consumers. I mean, my Lord, we're all dealing with massive inflation rate the way that we're dealing with today, and that's I'm not making a political point. I'm just telling you that's the fact of the matter, and this would just add to it if we don't understand the cost. When Congress first set this up, we had to have a reasonable impact of what it was going to be to the consumer moving forward, and all this needs to be understood. Mr. Fisher, you talked about something I was talking about with the EPA and the fact that they're not able to get these approvals done to actually make the change we need to. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my testimony, the statute says 90 days to 180 days. I'd say on average, if you have a PMN going under review at EPA and the review concludes and there's a consent order attached to that review, we're talking up to a year and a half, maybe longer. If you then add a SNR to it, a significant new use rule that would follow that approval process, then you're adding on another probably 2 years. So it's now become sort of a multi-year endeavor versus the 90 days to 180 days that was in the statute. Even when Congress amended the statute in 2016, it didn't change those timelines. Congress still assumed EPA would meet the 90 days to 180 days. And that, as you mentioned, or was mentioned earlier today, is a rare event. Most of the time, submitters need to anticipate it taking at least a year. In fact, I advise folks, don't expect anything under a year.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think this leads to something that we should be looking at too, that maybe we need to have a hearing with the EPA to hold their feet to the fire, so to say, on getting these out. I mean, this is important for safety perspectives. This is important to the tribes. It's important to the consumer. And there's no reason why they can't do this. I know they talk about not having enough money, but my Lord, it seems like every year we're raising their budget to begin with. They're just not prioritizing it the way that Congress has asked them to do. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll get your new name,